On behalf of the Planning Committee and my co-chair, Dr. Sebastian Schneeweiss, it's a great pleasure to welcome you here to the AHRQ Conference Center. The symposium began in 2006, so it's wonderful to see some veterans of the symposium who were there the first time, and we've done 3 others since today. It's also nice to see some new faces into the field. Our objectives today are to discuss, deliberate, and critique new and emerging research methods in CER. Methods, as all of you are aware, are the heart and soul of any research project, so I hope at the end of the day that you feel like you've learned something new and contributed to the dialogue. Our focus is really on original research, and we hope there's some new insights that are gained, and you'll have a toolbox that you didn't have when you started today. What really makes this symposium unique is that it brings together people from all settings, and I think that is something that I'm really proud about, whether you're from academia or you're from government or you're from the private industry. We're here today to discuss methods. The other thing that's very unique about the symposium is that all the presenters have made a commitment to take their papers and to write it up as a full article in a journal supplement so that the proceedings of the symposium are available to the broad scientific community. That's important because in some cases we're probably only going to touch the very surface of the presentations, but that also means that there's really an active and important role for all of you in the audience to really engage the authors about their methods and to hopefully provide some feedback and comments about what they're proposing so that those final articles in the supplement are really the best they can possibly be. We've been very productive in the past 5 years and published 3 supplements and over 60 articles. So the proceedings of last year's supplement were just published last month, and if you'd like a copy, they're available in the room next door, and they're also available on AHRQ's website to be downloaded electronically. Likewise, the other proceedings from the 2007 and 2011 are also available as both printed copies and electronic copies. In addition, I'll just mention a couple other resources briefly that we've been preparing in the AHRQ Decide program. One is a new step-by-step guide to writing a CER research protocol. We've just finished public comment on that, and we're planning to hopefully have it available as a final document in August or September. We are also on the 3rd edition of our methods guide for patient registries. That 3rd edition it will be available in 2013. You can still get the 2nd edition now as well on the website, and we have copies next door. And lastly, we've been publishing a series of best practices guides on specific methods, analytic methods, like incident user designs, propensity scores, and a new one is coming out this year on when to randomize. So those guides are also available, again, as resources for you on the website. And our goal has been in the program to really sort of develop a library of tools for researchers and guidance documents that hopefully will support really high-quality CER and PCOR. Well, with that, we have a very ambitious agenda for the next 2 days. You're going to hear from 22 different presentations that will cover a variety of topics on study designs and analysis of patient-centered outcomes research. So let's get started. A few logistic items for people who are here at the agency in the room. For those who are at AHRQ, this is a government-sponsored meeting, so we've been extremely efficient with resources. We can offer you a wonderful drinking fountain in the back corridor, and there are restroom facilities in the back as well. There's the closest place to get snacks is actually the gas station down the street on the corner of Gaither Road. So, and I'm not kidding. so all of that is for the refreshment side of things. Also, your red badges that you got when you walked in today, they are only good for today. So once you leave for the day, please turn them into the guard, and you'll need to be reissued a new badge tomorrow. Don't take it home with you. If you'd like to connect to the Internet, there's passwords and login information to my right. We have a web audience of roughly 500 people, so if you do ask a question, please come to the mic so that everyone can hear you. If you'd like to provide feedback directly to the authors and you can't get a chance to get to the mic, you can give the comments to them directly through their email addresses, or you can give it to us and we'll make sure the authors get them. Like I said, our real purpose is to make the papers that come out of this conference to be the best they can be. There'll be a chance to evaluate the symposium, so look for those opportunities when we bring them up later today. I can't not tell you how much I appreciate the planning committee, who are all listed in the front of your booklet, and you'll be meeting them throughout the next 2 days as they moderate many of the sessions. 4 people deserve special attention, though, who form the executive committee. That is my colleague, Dr. Sebastian Schneeweiss, who will be moderating the first panel session, Dr. John Seeger, who is right here in front, and he'll be here, Dr. Parvesh Norja from AHRQ, who is the mastermind of all of this, and Elizabeth Robinson Gary as well, who many of you got to meet in planning the registration. I hope it shows we spent about 12 months planning the symposium. About the week after last year's symposium, we started the planning process, so it's been a labor of love. Lastly, there will be posters hanging throughout the meeting. Please stop by and try to meet the authors who will be standing during their posters during the break this afternoon, about 3. When we have the afternoon break, they'll have a poster walk. We give them a little incentive by having a mini competition where the best 1 or 2 posters actually get invited to be part of the journal supplement. So I think, I looked at them briefly, it's going to be a really tough choice, so please take advantage. That was one of the highest rated parts of last year's symposium. So finally, just take advantage of everybody in the room. We'll have a lot of discussion. One of the fun parts of this meeting is getting to meet some new faces and talking to colleagues. So without further ado, let me introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Shereen Gabriel, and also give you just briefly the highlights of the rest of the afternoon. Dr. Gabriel is the William J. and Charles H. Mayo Professor of Medicine and Epidemiology. She served at Mayo Clinic. She has served as the chair of the Department of Health Services Research at Mayo. She founded the Mayo Clinic Center for Patient-Centered Outcomes Research, as well as the clinical training programs that later became part of their CTSA, which she now serves as the co-principal investigator. She has been president of the American College of Rheumatology and the founding chair of the ACR Quality Measures Committee. She received her MD with distinction from the University of Saskatchewan and her master's degree in clinical epidemiology and biostatistics at McMaster. Last year, in 2011, Dr. Gabriel was appointed by the U.S. Comptroller General to serve as chair of the Methodology Committee for the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Committee, where she has been leading the writing of the PCORI Methodology Committee report, a labor of love as well, I'm sure. She'll be discussing some of that and giving you some of the highlights today and what it means for the future of CER methods development. I had the opportunity to read it, and it's truly a remarkable document that really lays out those initial standards for patient-centered outcomes research. So I hope you'll take advantage and also go to the document and read it as well. After Dr. Gabriel's presentation, we'll have a keynote panel that will be composed of some of the members of the PCORI Methodology Committee and some who are not members of the committee. We have some guests from NIH. And then we'll have a very brief question and answer period. Dr. Gabriel has some family commitments, so she's not going to be able to stay exactly for the question and answers, but the Methodology Committee members will be here and can handle all the questions that you have. Then, as I mentioned, we'll start the poster walk about 3:50 and the second scientific session after that. So we have a full day, and it ends with the Director of AHRQ, Dr. Carolyn Clancy, will give some closing remarks. So with that, I will turn the podium over to Dr. Gabriel.
So thanks very much. That was way too kind, and I really appreciate Sebastian inviting me here. I particularly appreciated being able to sit in on this morning's session. I learned a whole lot, and I think when I leave here later today, I'm almost certain I will be taking away more than I give to you all, but I'll do my best anyway. So, and also, I just wanted to add my apologies. There's not much that trumps a work-related commitment like this, but my kids do, so I apologize. Okay, so my task today is, let's see if I can get this so I can see it a little more easily, to talk about the PCORI methods report and kind of talk about PCORI as a whole. Oh boy. This is on a different slide than that is. I'm not sure quite. Yeah. So when I advance, excuse me, the computer advances, but the ones up front don't. See? Works. Perfect. Thank you, Liz. So what my goal is to give you a little bit of an overview of PCORI as a whole. Hopefully some of you have some familiarity with that already. We'll go through it pretty quickly because I do hope at the end of my 20 minutes or so to take a few questions from you because even though I can't join the panel, I'm happy to take some questions at the end. So I'll run through some of the stuff that is sort of readily available on the website, and hopefully we can have at least a bit of a discussion. And then focus a bit on the PCORI Methodology Committee, in particular the first methodology report, an overview of how we developed it, what it contains, and end with a bit of a discussion about what it means for all of you, the leaders of the methodology community nationally. Okay. As you know, in terms of origin of the Institute, in March 2010, the 111th Congress created PCORI and really created only two bodies, the Board of Governors, which is a 19-member group, multi-stakeholder group, and I'll kind of share with you who those folks are if you haven't seen them already, and then the Methodology Committee, Sebastian, myself, Jean, and a few other folks appointed about a few months after the board was appointed. You can see the board in September, and we were appointed in January. So in terms of resources, PCORI has something on the order of $210 million from the trust fund for the 2010-2012 period. Following that, it's about $325 million, and for the last few years, on the order of $500 million to give away to folks like you every year, hopefully. The Board of Governors, as I mentioned, is a multi-stakeholder board, which is a good thing and sometimes a challenging thing. But basically, they represent a variety of different stakeholder groups, not only federal, state, and public health officials. So we have, as you'll see, Francis Collins and Carolyn Clancy on the board, but private payers, pharmaceutical device and diagnostic manufacturers, researchers, caregivers, physicians, nurses, and, of course, patient representatives. And this is the list. I'm going to just run and grab my glasses. I can't quite see. Sorry. So the chair of our board is Jean Washington, who's vice chancellor of UCLA. Vice chair is Steve Lipstein, who is president and CEO of Barnes Jewish in St. Louis. And you can kind of get a sense of the other members. I've highlighted and read some of the folks that I'm sure would be familiar to all of you: Carolyn Clancy, Francis Collins, Arnie Epstein, Harlan Krumholtz. But you may very well recognize many of the others as well. As I said, a very multi-stakeholder group representing various interests in the healthcare domain. Okay, oops, did it again. So it happened again. I'm not sure why I keep. It advances on the screen. Advance one more. No, it advances on the screen, but not on. I think it's because I'm highlighted here, maybe. I don't know. That's what happens when you're on a time crunch. It's kind of a predictable thing. But what I was going to say was, with respect to the methodology committee, just as there's diversity in the. Just use this, maybe? Yeah. Okay, I'll use the keyboard. Let me just go back here. So likewise, the methodology committee brings a variety of different perspectives, but various scientific and clinical perspectives. So you can see we have statisticians. Sharon Lees Norman, I believe, spoke at this meeting last year. She's the vice chair of the methodology committee along with me. We have clinical investigators, epidemiologists. Again, we have government represented. We have Gene Slutsky sits with us, but also VA and NIH, Mike Lauer from the NIH, a variety of clinical disciplines, and public and private institutions. And again, I won't read all the names, but just so that you are familiar with them, I'm sure at least half of them are familiar to most, if not all of you. And of course, Sebastian is a member of the committee also. So what is our mission statement? Helping people make informed healthcare decisions and improving healthcare delivery and outcomes by producing, promoting high integrity evidence-based information that comes from research guided by patients, caregivers, and the broader healthcare community. So a very CER-like mission and a very multi-stakeholder perspective. I was looking at your supplements from previous years, and I saw Hal Sock's supplement where he talked about the importance of definitions, and we actually worked pretty hard and struggled a bit defining patient-centered outcomes research, really under the leadership of a group within the methodology committee. And this is a definition that we now use, that the Institute now uses. PCOR helps people and their caregivers communicate and make informed healthcare decisions, allowing their voices to be heard and assessing the value of healthcare options. And you can see that the importance of every one of those words. Obviously, the patient-centered perspective comes through, the notion of value and healthcare decision-making. It's a two-part definition, and the first part really speaks to the goal of addressing questions that are important to people and patients. And so these are the kinds of questions that frame the work that we do. And it's framed from a patient's perspective, given my personal characteristics, conditions, and preferences, what should I expect will happen to me? What are my options and the benefits and harms of those options? What can I do to improve the outcomes, again, that are most important to me? And how can clinicians and the healthcare delivery systems they work in help me make the best decisions about my health and healthcare? The second part of the definition is really what's more written in a way that's more familiar to all of us. And I won't read all of it, but assessing the benefits, risks, harms of the various types of interventions. Again, commenting on the importance of patient preferences, incorporating a wide variety of settings and diversity of participants, and then the balance, the trade-offs that are inherent in such decisions, investigating and optimizing outcomes while addressing burden and other challenges. So everything that's funded by PCORI and all of the work that we do and the methods that we promote and develop really need to serve this definition. So these are what's known as foundational pillars for PCORI, and you can see rigorous methods is sort of right on top of patient and stakeholder engagement as a foundational pillar. And then, although research dissemination and infrastructure development look like equal-sized columns, research is really the big column, and in terms of at least funding allocation, and through that we hope to advance patient-centered outcomes and have an impact. So the first PCORI methodology report, and I'll use the word first here to describe the report many times, and I'll kind of discuss at the end why I'm emphasizing that. And the report includes methodologic standards, recommended actions, and a translation table. Some of the language that you'll see here and some of the language that I'll use might be a little bit unfamiliar, and part of that is because it comes directly from the statute. So those words in black there are what the statute sort of directed us to do. With respect, just for a bit of background, the role of the methodology committee, we have devised a vision, a mission, and an overall advisory role. But our vision is that the methodologic knowledge and standards that are not that just we develop, but that we promote through the work of all of you and many others, really become widely adopted as best practices across the entire stakeholder community. We hope, again, not just the 15 of us, but we hope to catalyze an effort so that we do become sort of the go-to resource for individuals and groups looking for information on scientific methodology for PCOR, and the how-to group for funding methodologic research that addresses methodologic areas of focus and methodologic science that again helps PCORI accomplish its mission. And of course we serve as a scientific advisor to the board in a number of capacities, and got a little clip from the statute there because everything we do and everything we're about really aligns with and must align with the statute. So the first methodology report objectives kind of align with that. Guidance about the appropriate use of methods in PCOR. Establishing priorities to address gaps in research methods. So this is a first step. It's a first report. And one of the big things that we learned through this effort is where the gaps are, perhaps where the critical gaps are, recommending actions to support the standards, and then mapping research methods to specific research questions, at least beginning to develop a translation framework. They call it a translation table in the statute, but a translation framework to help us understand that. And I'll just give you a sense of how we went about this, and again, just a bit of a high level of what the report contains. So how we developed it, within the methodology committee, we sort of split ourselves up into 4 working groups to identify and prioritize major methodologic questions to be addressed. Obviously, we couldn't address the entire field. We'd be doing it forever, and we had a deadline stipulated in the statute of May 10th, 2012. So we had to get something done, delivered to the board by that date. We realized that it couldn't be just the work of the group of us, and so one of the first things that we did was to put out calls for RFPs for others to submit contracts to help us do this. So we brought in researchers who were contracted to address selected topics, and I'll show you a little bit more about that. And many of these, all but 2, I think, Jean and I were thinking through them quickly this afternoon. I think all but 2 have association with either the DECIDE or the EPCs. But the contractors developed research materials sort of along with us. And we then solicited external feedback on the translation framework, and that effort was led by Sebastian, as you'll see in a little bit. We held workshops to discuss the initial contractor findings with other invited experts who weren't involved. So we really tried to have cast as broad a net as we could in the information gathering phase. And then we did an internal review and generated the report. I'll actually just kind of skip this. One of the tasks that we had to create the methodology report was devising standards. And so one of the first steps is, well, what is a standard? And we used the IOM definition of a standard that you can see there. And basically the standard or the recommendation had to be actionable, feasible, and implementable, and supported by scientific evidence or reasonable expectation that the standard helps achieve the anticipated level of quality in PCOR. So you can see that there in the reference if you're interested. As I mentioned, we had quite a broad information gathering phase. All told, about 100 individuals, 17 groups from around the country. I think about $1.5 million went to these groups to help us get the report out, the workshops, and then the translation table effort. There were 24 submissions received in response to the RFI to provide input on that framework. Another key area of activity is electronic data systems. How do we better leverage those data systems for PCOR? 57 stakeholders, again, stakeholders and stakeholder groups from around the country were interviewed to understand the challenges associated with that. On the 2nd of July, 1st and 2nd of July, just a couple of weeks away, we're holding a workshop to further discuss that. We had a number of independent consultants that helped us edit the report and review the inputs. And then finally, because of the importance of reproducible research, we engaged an interim researcher in partnership with Steve Goodman, who many of you probably know, to do a literature review and really provide some guidance really to the board on the degree to which reproducible research needs to be part of PCORI policies. And so just to give you a sense of the work that's been done, the 17 reports addressing 15 topics that I've mentioned, you can see the topics that we chose to address at this first round: adaptive trials, registries, patient-reported outcomes, missing data. So it's a little bit of the usual suspects: diagnostic testing, causal inference, heterogeneity, involving patients and topic generation, value of information with respect to prioritization, systematic reviews, again, integrating patients' voices and eliciting the patient perspective, and then we had a number of interviews. And just so all of you are aware, all of these reports, exactly the way the contractors put them together, are available on the PCORI website for you all to take a look at if you're interested. We then took all of that information and really distilled it according to these 5 criteria. First one obviously being patient-centeredness, but also scientific rigor, transparency, the empirical or theoretical basis of the work, and then practicality, other considerations. And came up with a number of recommendations and voted on them, went through an iterative process and voted on them. And at the end of the day, that's really what resulted in the recommendations that you see in the report today, the standards. First set of draft standards. So it was a consensus process, and through that process, we recommended methodological standards across these 11 research domains: how to formulate a research question, what does it mean to be patient-centered, what are the methodologies involved there, research prioritization, there's kind of a general category, and then you can see the others there aligning with the contract that I referred to. And just to give you an idea of what the standards kind of look like, and so in each one of these boxes there are a number of standards. The standard itself has the definition, the background, and the evidence behind it and why we chose it. So you can see here, engage patients, patient informants, persons representative of the population of interest in all phases of PCOR, and that's standard number 4.1.1 if you want to look at it. And under causal inference, there's a standard on the importance of assessing instrumental variable assumptions. So you can see there's quite a bit of variety depending on each one of within and even among these domains. But just to give you a sense of what we have in there. Before I leave the standards, the other piece that I referred to a couple of times is the translation table that the statute directed us to do. And this was something that I'm kind of embarrassing Sebastian by putting his name in fancy letters there, but this was really something that was guided by Sebastian's vision. And rather than a translation table, the way it was envisioned, I think, in the statute, he kind of had us think about a translation framework that's a lot more flexible to map research methods to specific questions. And, simplistically, there's the research question, the interface, and then the translation framework. And this approach prioritizes the questions, formulates the question in a patient-centered fashion, and then defines the relative importance of evidence characteristics, identifies intrinsic and extrinsic study characteristics, and then matches the question to the study design, data sources, and analytic strategies. And I'll show you what that looks like, but you really have to look at the original. It doesn't really show terribly well on the slide, but you can see on the very, I'm afraid to touch anything here, but on the very left-hand side of the slide, phase 1 is the patient question. I should really have Sebastian explain this. This is his creation. The patient question and the research question. And so, again, making sure that we start with questions that are important to patients, incorporating things like prior evidence, the intent of the research, and so on, specifying elements such as the patient population, the intervention, the comparator, the PCOTs, the outcomes, the setting, and then considering the research category. Kind of in the middle box there, you've got the various research categories as a therapeutics question, a diagnostics question, evidence synthesis, or other. And then based on the research category, the translation table defines the study design, the data source, the analytic strategy, or at least provides some input on those. And then there are extrinsic and intrinsic characteristics that really come into play, things like heterogeneity, data availability, and so on. So I've rushed through a lot of information, but you kind of get the sense of a flexible framework that can provide some guidance regarding methods for specific questions, and of course you have study execution, report dissemination at the end of the day. So basically it's a 9-chapter report, and these are the components, again a description of how we went about it, an overview of the standards, some background on each one, and then the 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 are really the specific methods that we focused on in this first report. And then Chapter 9 talks about what we're going to do next. And even with respect to the statute, it's very clear that this is a first step that we, the Methodology Committee, with the rest of the community is directed to update and improve over time. But the other thing I'd bring your attention to is the standards and recommended actions, and doesn't project terribly well, which defines what PCORI is to do with these standards. And one of the key things that, again, we're directed by the statute to do is to use the standards to evaluate the research applications that come in for PCORI grants. So increasingly, that's going to be one of the uses, but there are other uses. And then in the appendices are the reports that were put together by the 17 groups that really helped us put this forward. So this is sort of the slide that I hope will get a bit of discussion going, what it means for you slides. If you actually go into the report and look at the methodologic standards, you'll see that there's nothing there that people in this room don't know. So this was a summary, a synthesis of existing work, hopefully arranged in a user-friendly way, but it is a best practices. At least as this first iteration. And so what you will see there, if you haven't gone there, is stuff that is known to this community. We hope it'll be useful to you as a training tool, especially as some of the junior members of the group are putting grants together. These are increasingly going to be used. These standards are going to be used to judge the methods. But also, we are looking for help from this community to help us identify and prioritize the gaps in methodological knowledge. I didn't talk about the priorities for funding for PCORI. They've been well described. There are 5 of them. One of them is methodology. And so we need we've learned quite a bit already from the 15 research contractors, but we're really looking for more input from the broader community as to what do you think are the most important methodologic research challenges, methodology gaps that we need to fill through funded research. First, and again, just to reiterate that this is a first step. It doesn't cover the entire waterfront by any means. The next several months, and it is a draft, so the next several months are intended to share this in much more detail than you can do in 20 minutes, but in a workshop setting where various groups will be brought together to help us understand what's right and what's not so right about our first draft report and where we should go next. And there'll also be opportunities to do that online in a kind of a public comment period. So through workshops, advisory boards, and public comments, we really do need to hear from the broader community as to what we got right and what we can do better, either in this iteration or in subsequent iterations. And the more active you are and the more you help us, the more you can have a hand in really guiding the future of PCORI. It is an effort that's multi-stakeholder by definition, and so we really can't do this as a committee. We've got to reach much beyond the 15 of us. And the hope at the end of the day is that with the work that you've done and others have done, and hopefully with some resources and help from PCORI, we can begin to harmonize the way PCOR is done so that we have more of the right stuff done and less of the other stuff done. So I will there are lots and lots of folks to thank. There's a huge number of staff individuals at PCORI. I couldn't even list the PCORI staff names, editing teams, workshop external attendees. The actual PIs and research team members are listed in that big column in the middle there, so you can see that many of them are individuals that belong to or are associated with this community. And I always like to thank the PCORI Methodology Committee members and with Sebastian and Jean and many others with whom you're familiar, who have been just a terrific group to work with. So I will stop there and can take a couple of questions before I dash out. Thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you very much, Herein, for your remarks. And we do have time for a few questions before I invite the other two keynote speakers to give their remarks, and then we have a broader discussion to fill the time. So any questions for Herein? Yes, please. If you want to mention your name, and if you could go to the microphone, please, because it's broadcasted.
Hi, 12JUN12 from Columbia University and New York State Psychiatry Institute. I have a question about the R in PCOR. So I wonder whether they should be interpreted as human subject research in the sense of primary focusing, aiming to produce generalizable knowledge, or does it include an element of quality improvement that might be separate from the human subjects research? The reason I'm asking is that the kind of questions that PCOR tries to answer has a lot of flavors of quality improvement. So I would appreciate your thoughts.
Yeah, and that's what we tried to answer in the patient-centered methods. I think it's a question that comes up a lot. So, what do you mean by patient-centered outcomes research, which is what led to the effort on the definition. And we have, in the report, there are standards, and I hate to use that term because it sounds so constraining, but there's at least guidance on what constitutes a patient-centered research question. So it could be either of the two. And it's possible that certain questions in both of the categories that you mentioned would not fit. So it really needs, it really is more than just yes, it involves patients or yes, it involves quality. It really ought to be a question that addresses a research question that addresses the kinds of things that we hear are important to patients. And it is specified in more detail in the patient-centeredness standards in the report. I don't know if you wanted to add more to that, Sebastian.
Oh, well, I think you handled this quite nicely. So,
okay.
But it is a research institute. I mean, the main focus is research and dissemination, are not necessarily directly intervening in the healthcare system.
Yeah, I thought your question was what constitutes a patient-centered research question, right?
Any more comments? Yes, please.
Joel Greenhouse from Carnegie Mellon University. The role of stakeholders is really very important, and in many cases it's clear where you want to get input from stakeholders. What's not clear to me is in methodological research, such as statistical research, design, what's the role of stakeholders should they play in the development of methods research for PCOR?
Yeah, so you bring up a very good point. There are 5 research priorities that PCORI is going to fund. 4 of them have already been announced. The first 4 have been announced, not the methods group. And in those 4, stakeholder involvement is required. Now, with the methodology grants, which we haven't written the PFAs yet, it will probably be somewhat different. It still has to be something that clearly leads to advancing PCOR. It still has to address a patient-centered question, but the nature of the research and the nature of the work is going to be a little bit different.
Thank you.
Hi, Sarah Shoemaker from Apt Associates. I think you just touched on it a little bit, so to the extent that we can ask the question, I know that PCORI is going to be releasing the PFAs on methodologies. Is there a focus that PCORI is going to start with on that set of PFAs, or is it still broad methodology?
Well, actually, that's what I was alluding to when I said we need input from all of you. So those haven't been written yet. In terms of what are the methodologic research priorities, one of the things that will guide us is what's already in the report and what we learned from all those contractors. They told us some areas where we have pretty good knowledge, and then here are some things that where we really don't know very much, and so that'll be part of it. We will be holding some workshops over the summer. We will be opening the report for public comment in a number of weeks. And so we're actually looking for input from the broader community. Tell us what you think are the most critical methodologic gaps that research needs to fill. And between what we hear from all of you, and all of that will happen in the public domain, and between what you all tell us and what's already in this report in terms of gaps, and there's quite a bit in there already, that will constitute the methodology research priorities.
Any more questions for Shireen? Yeah, please.
Yeah, Bob Giffen, Covidian. Is this on? Okay. So I just wanted to get a sense of the long-term vision here. You know, maybe 10 years.
Nothing goes beyond June. We can't.
Nothing goes beyond June. Okay.
There's just June right now.
No, but I mean, I'm really interested in this idea of, you know, what is PCORI going to become is it going to kind of define the way you do this kind of research, and then sort of that'll seep into the culture of research more broadly? Is it going to actually be doing a large percentage of this research, which on its current budget, it's obviously not? Is it going to try to sort of really be transformative in the sense that it addresses the reason it maybe was started in the first place, because you know, the massive research complex we have, you know, NIH and everything, hasn't been doing things in quite the way that, you know, getting at the questions from the patient perspective and the things that we need to know to make treatment decisions. So I'm just kind of wondering what the grand vision is.
Well, I think I did go through my slides too quickly. It's more the former of what you just described than the latter. Obviously, we can't do the research. We don't want to. It's not what we're there for. You know, as a convener, catalyst, collaborator, perhaps, to hopefully develop, with respect to the methodology, promote the development, fund the development of methods that do seep into the community, so that there is this harmonization and collaboration across all of the groups that are doing this work. But in terms of doing it all ourselves, that's certainly not the case. And with respect to NIH and AHRQ, we can't do it without them, and so we really have to collaborate with and learn from NIH and AHRQ to the extent that we can. So.
Great. One more question? Okay. No? So why don't we invite Jean and Phil to come up here? And thank you, Shireen. Thank you very much. And huggy, okay. Just a clap on the shoulder. So why don't we start with Jean? And Jean is, of course, as everybody knows, here the director for the Center for Outcomes and Evidence at AHRQ since 2003, and also a member of the Methods Committee of PCORI. And I'm curious what she has to share on this issue.
So I'll stand up mainly because I'm marginally taller than Shireen, which is, just good so you can see me. So I just want to reiterate a little bit about what Shireen talked about in terms of the role of the methods report and some of the things that we've discussed as a methods committee. And one of probably the most prominent things that we discussed is that actually there's really nothing new, so to speak, in the methods report. It builds on work that all of you have done in this room and outside of this room. So a lot of the process was actually trying to identify what things should be addressed first and then trying to identify research gaps and to make this as a sort of inclusive process as possible. And one of the last questioners asked about what the long-term vision was. And you know, the law as it's written now, this organization will sunset, not AHRQ, but PCORI in 2019 unless it's reauthorized. So it can continue as an organization, but it won't have the same funding through a PCOR trust fund that it does now. So I think that one of the hallmarks, at least from AHRQ's perspective, of patient-centered outcomes research or comparative effectiveness research as a subset of that, is that it is patient-centered and it's including people who would use research and have decision-making needs, and that was recognized as well by PCORI's Board of Governors and the Methodology Committee, and definitely has been sort of a guiding force in developing the methods. Inclusionary, making sure that stakeholders are included, including those patients who have to make decisions, their caregivers, the clinicians, and other health professionals who provide health care, and the systems in which they reside. So, you know, what distinguishes patient-centered outcomes research, I believe, is well documented in the report. And it is a transformation of clinical research and health systems research when you're linking the actual research question to improved health outcomes, which hasn't always been done in our research environment. And so from my experience working with the Methodology Committee and also the methods research that we funded through this agency, is that's a new way of looking at how you design a research study, how you implement it, and how you communicate the results. So if you're going into a community, you're recruiting patients from a community, and your research is done, you need to go back into that community and make sure that they understand the research findings and how it relates to them. And certainly, if you're a new investigator or even a seasoned investigator, you know, how you design your research study, if you're doing patient-centered outcomes research or comparative effectiveness research, needs to take into account some of these important distinctions. And one of the things that I was really pleased about in the Methodology Committee is that we didn't devolve to that age-old argument, is it the randomized controlled trial or the observational study that sits on top? And I really commend us for not devolving. I would say evolving, but I don't think it's an evolutionary argument to go into RCT versus observational study. And it really was, as Shireen said, showing Sebastian's work on the table, is really making sure that the research design meets the research question that you're asking. And often that's multiple research designs to actually get at the answers that you need. So from AHRQ's perspective, we're very proud that our researchers that we fund and the meetings that we've convened have really shown to be helpful to organizations like PCORI. And everyone in this room, by the fact that you're here, you have an interest in this area, or you've contributed to this area, or you want to contribute to this area. So that's very important indeed. And the next day and a half is really going to explore some areas that really are fairly new, robust, and dynamic, and I'm confident that the work that goes on here will continue to inform the work that PCORI does, and the work that AHRQ does, and the work that our colleagues down the road, up the road, down the road, right? Yeah. Our three-letter acronym colleagues have made use of our work as well, and in fact, Phil used to be one of our DECIDE investigators. And so until he told me he started worrying about the cost of centrifuges for biological specimens. But so I'll probably stop now and let Phil make comments.
Thank you very much, Jean. So the next panel speaker is Dr. Phil Wang, who is the Deputy Director and Acting Scientific Director of the National Institute of Mental Health, and himself an accomplished mental health epidemiologist and outcomes researcher. So thank you very much for coming over.
Sure. Thanks for the invitation, and let me add my welcome to you all. And also congratulations to Dr. Gabriel and the entire methodology committee for producing really this fine report. At NIMH, we've invested heavily in patient-centered outcomes research over the past decade, although we didn't know to call it that, I guess, over that time period. But I'm referring to some large effectiveness trials that maybe you're more familiar with, the STAR, the STEP, the CATIE trials. These are large effectiveness trials that were conducted in patients with schizophrenia, bipolar illness, major depressive disorder. These were extremely useful for the Institute, and they produced some very sobering results. They essentially, if I can summarize, they showed that our existing treatments help some, but they don't help very many, and many patients do not achieve acceptable outcomes. And that's had a pretty important impact. So this investment in patient-centered outcomes research has really influenced some of the funding strategies, decisions, kind of visions within the Institute, and really pushed us kind of in two directions. From simple comparisons of individual agents, existing treatments, one direction it's pushed us is really getting back to basics, which I think maybe is what you were alluding to. We really don't understand enough about disease pathogenesis, pathophysiology. Because of that, the treatment targets that our translational investigators have been going after really, in many cases, they have never been validated, never been rejected. And that has caused the pipeline not to yield really the next generation we hope for of highly efficacious and highly tolerable treatment. So that's definitely one direction that the Institute is embarking in. The other important direction that we learned from patient-centered outcomes research that we've invested in is to go in the other direction as well. So with existing treatments, to really essentially apply them in a much better fashion so that patients receiving them do achieve better outcomes. Some things we learned, from the STEP BD study, is you can actually achieve better outcomes with the application of various forms of psychotherapy. They're some of our most promising ways of improving treatments, pharmacotherapies. So one idea is to bundle moderately and modestly effective modalities. Another is to apply them earlier in the disease course before the seemingly inevitable decline in function that particularly patients with serious mental illness experience. And I see John Kane here. I think you're speaking later. Hopefully he'll give you a really good example of the current patient-centered outcomes research that we're supporting. He's the PI of the RAISE trial, which it takes advantage of both of these kind of concepts. Can we bundle treatments, best practices, pharmacotherapy, supportive employment, some disease management models, and apply them early, in this case after the first episode of schizophrenia, before the patient becomes disabled and ultimately ends up on SSI and other very, very costly health states representing the poor outcomes they experience. So these are kind of the past, current forms of patient-centered outcomes research that the Institute is investing in. It goes without saying that none of this would be possible without rigorous methodology, and I think this is where this audience comes in. You actually have, I see actually the people who have designed the very studies I'm talking about, analyzed them, interpreted the data. And so you clearly have given input, I think, into this report, which captures kind of the breadth of methods that are really needed by the field to study. I hope you're hearing kind of the range of interventions. These are not just comparisons of individual psychotropic medications. These may actually be comparisons of healthcare system delivery redesigns. The methods also need to be capable of studying using the breadth of study designs that will be required: experimental, quasi-experimental, observational. I mean, all are ultimately going to achieve a place, I think, in this endeavor. So anyway, congratulations again to the committee, I think, for putting together a report that I think is clear with clear recommendations. I think it's going to be helpful certainly to the investigators we fund currently and I think the ones that we hope to fund in the future.
Thank you very much, Phil and Jean. So I want to open this panel now for any questions from the audience for our distinguished guests here. Why don't I start with a bit of a tricky question. The patient outcomes research, or comparative effectiveness research, wants to also, among other things, focus on the effectiveness of therapeutic interventions in routine care, right? Many things happen in routine care that are different from a very controlled research environment in RCTs that we often see. So particularly in medications, there is a thing like non-adherence. Patients do not take the medications that they're supposed to take, and what you're studying is the effect of a drug that is, some people take it, but many people won't take it, and often you will see no effect really of the therapies, particularly not between two active ingredients, right? It's very hard to show superiority, which asks me then, what are we studying here? Are we really studying the therapy that we're interested in, or are we studying the system? How can we reconcile this effectiveness from the efficacy? And any sense here from you? Should be on, yeah.
So, I mean, why the outcomes achieved in, say, some of these large effectiveness trials were poor is an open question. Certainly, there's some possibility that the non-adherence may have contributed to the lack of effectiveness in some cases. Some of it may also, I think you're alluding to another possibility, which is just heterogeneity. One thing we definitely are learning about mental disorders is that there are not single disorders. There are clearly multiple disorders within any one diagnosis. I mean, autism is a good example. Within the past few years, it's clear there are already about, say, 30 genetic variants that are causally related to different types of autism, and that number just seems to be increasing. It could be very plausible to say there are some people who respond to treatment, but they're buried within kind of the heterogeneous patient population that includes both those who will and won't respond, who have a defect in that particular mechanism that treatment is targeting, and then others don't. So one thing that we are interested in going forward is in personalizing. And that's where I think some of the methodology is being developed could be very helpful. I mean, in an ideal world, it would start with maybe observational studies looking at putative biomarkers that might help stratify patients who do or don't respond. If they prove robust, one could design stratified prospective trials, stratify patients based on a potential predictor of responding, not responding, and see, does that actually help improve the in other words, based on the treatment assignment that you make, depending on what the predictor suggests, maybe you overall get better effectiveness. So, kinds of trials, hopefully you're hearing certain kinds of methods, but that will hopefully get at some of the issues that you're talking about.
And just one other thing, which is sort of the other side of personalized medicine, is we also have to recognize that the systems of care that patients are receiving care in a pragmatic approach look very different than where, very pristinely designed randomized controlled trial where, you're following strict protocols. The physicians that are, dispensing the care are, I'm not saying anything important. So, I think one of the reasons we're here today, too, is to talk about that. What do you do when the caregivers don't look the same or act the same as the caregivers that are in randomized controlled trials, very tightly controlled trials? And that's something that we haven't really bitten off very well in terms of understanding how that affects health outcomes and how we can actually see an effect size.
Any further comments? So AHRQ is engaged in this field of comparative effective physician for quite a while and has established several research networks like the CITE network, like the CERTs and other the EPCs. How successful do you think is this concept of having kind of researchers at standby and research questions come up and you go back to them, and what does NIH think about such research networks?
Yeah, so, this agency has funded a lot of research networks, the ones that you've spoken about, the primary care-based research network, the ACTION network, which is really for implementation science. Networks have certain unique aspects in terms of their ability to grow the collective, sometimes larger than the individual centers. This agency has made some very large investments in health HMORN as well as the DARTnet, which is both distributed research models, one based on primary care settings, the other on integrated delivery systems. And, all of this just includes building up infrastructure on which to do research so that you don't have to create it at the beginning every time you start a research endeavor or project. And I think it also builds up the infrastructure for other organizations to use. I mean, FDA, Mini-Sentinel builds hugely off of the investments that both NIH and AHRQ have made in terms of distributed research models. And I think that CDC obviously has used the Vaccine Safety Network, which is built off of the HMORN. And so all of this is a resource that all funding agencies can make use of.
Yeah, I'll just underscore what Jean just said. Obviously, there's a utility in once you establish a network, whether it's practice-based, research network or HMORN, or in any case, we're also interested in other kinds of networks, some early phase experimental medicine trial networks. It's better to reuse it than create it de novo. And any kind of efficiencies you can build in, shared IRBs so that you get approval quicker, things like that, would be very helpful, I think, for the investigator community, and also just decrease the cost of conducting trials, which there are far more good questions to answer than there are research dollars to support trials. So increasing the efficiency of conducting trials is going to be critical going forward. So on the NIH side, we're attempting to do some of this. We also are looking at the HMRN, have the privilege of serving on an NIH-wide Common Fund initiative that's looking at how to. Yes. We're working not to be redundant with some of the other funders that are also using this for its it has a lot of features that make it very attractive. We're thinking about it for use in going after some folks with rare genomes, rare phenomes, in order to do some complementary kind of research. The sheer size allows you to and the electronic medical records and administrative data allow you to essentially pre-screen for some very, very interesting, important people who you can learn a lot about pathophysiology from, maybe conduct some of these stratified trials I was talking about. In other words, you could find people with, say, a very rare genetic variant and, bring them into a trial of a therapeutic small molecule that targets that particular genetic defect. In other words, it's a better way to study efficacy. So we're interested in the same networks. I think what you're also hearing is we really need to push in this other end, of therapeutic development in a way that's the pressure is really on us. Pharma's not is kind of deciding that there's better opportunity potentially outside of CNS drug development, in part because of some of the perception, at least, that we don't have good treatment targets. So we're interested in networks. We're also interested in networks kind of across the scientific spectrum for some very important reasons.
Great, thank you. Any more questions from the audience? So I avoided asking a question for a specific RFA because I know I get answers from you without saying anything. So we are looking forward to the next RFAs in the direction of methods development and whatever input this audience can provide to you and to PCORI, of course, right? I hope the funding agency will pick that up and incorporate that into their future RFAs for our community. So with that, thank you very much, both of you. We're in time for starting the first session. I think Scott will kick it off.